Toby sued his parents and received a $1,200,000 settlement for years of favoritism toward his older sister, which deeply affected his life. He sued his parents for manipulating his golden sister and received a settlement of $1,200,000. Growing up, Toby always felt like he lived in the shadow of his older sister, Bethany. She was 3 years older than him, and from the moment he was old enough to notice, it was clear she was the star of their family. His parents, Mark and Susan, were well off and well respected in their community. His father ran a thriving real estate business, and his mother, a retired concert pianist, devoted her time to social events and managing their home. From the outside, they looked like the perfect family, but inside, it was a different story. Bethany was their golden child, and everything about her life reflected that. She was brilliant, charismatic, and excelled at everything she tried, whether it was academics, sports, or music. She outshone everyone, including Toby. His parents adored her, showering her with praise and attention. Every milestone she reached was celebrated like a major event, complete with elaborate parties and expensive gifts. Toby was there too, of course, but more as a background character. His own accomplishments, modest as they were, barely registered. It wasn't that he wasn't trying. He did well enough in school and stayed out of trouble, but he didn't shine like Bethany. The difference in how they were treated became painfully clear over the years. One Christmas stands out in Toby's mind. He was 8, and Bethany was 11. His parents had gone all out with the presents that year. The living room was piled high with gifts, but the centerpiece was a grand piano, gleaming under the Christmas lights. Bethany had been begging for it for months, and his mother, who still missed her own days as a pianist, had finally caved. They were ecstatic as they unveiled it, going on and on about how Bethany would carry on the family tradition. When it was Toby's turn, his dad handed him a small box. Inside was a sketch pad and a set of crayons. "We thought you might like to draw," he said with a smile. Toby tried to act grateful, but the message was clear. Bethany was the star, and he was just there. Things didn't improve as they got older. In school, Bethany continued to dominate. She was class president, captain of the cheerleading squad, and eventually valedictorian. Everyone loved her. Teachers sang her praises, and her peers either idolized her or envied her. Meanwhile, Toby struggled to find his place. He had a small group of friends, nerdy kids like him who loved video games and comic books, but he was invisible to most of the school. He wasn't bullied, exactly, but he wasn't noticed either. One of the most humiliating moments of his childhood happened during a school talent show. Toby had decided to perform a magic act, something he'd been practicing for weeks. Bethany was also in the show, playing a piano piece she had mastered in a matter of days. She went first, and of course, the audience went wild. Her performance was flawless, and she got a standing ovation. Then it was Toby's turn. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped one of his props. A few kids in the audience laughed, and Toby could feel his face burning. He stumbled through the rest of his act, desperate to just get it over with. Afterward, his parents gave him a half-hearted good job, but their attention quickly shifted back to Bethany, who was basking in her glory. Bethany wasn't deliberately cruel, at least not usually. After the talent show, she came up to Toby with that insufferable smile of hers and said, "You were great, Toby. It's so brave of you to try." Her words stung, not because they were mean, but because they felt so condescending. Toby hated that he cared so much about her opinion. As they moved into their teenage years, favoritism became impossible to ignore. His parents poured resources into Bethany's future, paying for private tutors, expensive summer programs, and any extracurricular activity she showed interest in. Toby got none of that. When he asked if he could take art classes, his dad shrugged and said, "Maybe next year," a promise that never materialized. Bethany's charm extended to the rest of the family as well. Their relatives adored her. Family gatherings turned into endless cycles of "Bethany is so talented," and "Bethany is going to do great things." Toby often wondered if they even remembered his name. At one Thanksgiving dinner, his aunt turned to him and said, "You must be so proud of your sister." Toby nodded, biting back the urge to say, "And what about me?" Even as Toby tried to carve out a path for himself, it felt like Bethany was always one step ahead, effortlessly overshadowing him. She didn't just succeed, she excelled, and she did it with an ease that made Toby's own struggles seem pitiful in comparison. Toby began to resent her, not just for how she was treated, but for how she made him feel about himself. His parents' favoritism wasn't just about praise or attention, it had real consequences. When Bethany turned 16, his dad surprised her with a brand new car, a sleek red convertible. She squealed with delight, hugging him and gushing about how it was the best day of her life. 2 years later, when Toby turned 16, he got the keys to their old family sedan, a beat-up station wagon with a busted radio and a sagging roofliner. "It's still a good car," his dad said, as if that made it any less humiliating. Bethany went off to an Ivy League university, her tuition fully covered by his parents, who couldn't stop bragging about their brilliant daughter. Toby, on the other hand, ended up at a state school, working part-time jobs to cover what his partial scholarship didn't. His parents didn't even bother to visit when he moved into his dorm. They were too busy helping Bethany set up her new apartment near campus. By the time Toby graduated, the resentment he felt toward Bethany and his parents had hardened into something deeper. He knew it wasn't healthy, but he couldn't help it. Every time he saw her, with her perfect life and her endless string of successes, it felt like a reminder of everything he wasn't. The first time Bethany referred to Toby as her backup plan, it was meant as a joke, or at least that's how she sold it. It was during one of those rare family dinners where everyone pretended they were closer than they really were. Bethany was home for the weekend with her fiancé, Brian, a stockbroker with the personality of a cardboard box but a bank account big enough to make Toby's parents fawn over him. They were sitting around the dining table, halfway through dessert, when Bethany casually leaned back in her chair and said, "Well, if Brian ever dumps me, at least I know Toby will always be single and available." The room erupted into laughter, but Toby just sat there, stunned. It wasn't the kind of joke you expect to hear from your sister, especially not in front of your fiancé. Sarah, who had been sitting quietly beside Toby, gave him a small, uncomfortable smile, the kind that said she was trying not to make a scene but didn't find it funny either. Later that night, as they were driving home, Sarah finally said, "Does she always talk to you like that?" Her tone was neutral, but Toby could tell she was bothered. "Bethany is Bethany," Toby replied, trying to brush it off. "She thinks she's being funny." Sarah didn't push it further, but Toby could see the question lingering in her eyes. She didn't need to say it out loud. Toby was already asking himself the same thing. Over the next few months, Bethany's jokes became a recurring theme. She'd bring it up at the most inappropriate times, always with that same smug smile, as if she enjoyed watching Toby squirm. At first, Toby tried to laugh it off, but it was hard not to take it personally. It didn't help that Brian found it hilarious. "Hey, at least you've got a backup plan, buddy," he said once, clapping Toby on the shoulder. Toby wanted to punch him in his perfectly chiseled face. Sarah, however, wasn't amused. During one family barbecue, Bethany made her usual comment, something along the lines of, "Don't get too comfortable, Brian. Toby's been waiting in the wings his whole life." This time, Sarah didn't hold back. "That's incredibly disrespectful," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Toby isn't anyone's backup plan." The laughter stopped. Bethany's face froze for a moment, then twisted into a patronizing smile. "Oh, come on, Sarah, it's just a joke. Don't take it so seriously." "I'm not sure why you think that's funny," Sarah shot back. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Toby's parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one said anything to Bethany. They never did. The drive home that night was silent. Toby could tell Sarah was furious, but she waited until they were in the privacy of their apartment to let it out. "You need to stand up to her, Toby," she said, pacing the living room. "This isn't okay. She's treating you like a doormat, and you're letting her." "I know," Toby muttered, rubbing his temples. "But what am I supposed to do? She's always been like this. If I say anything, it'll just make things worse." "It's already worse," Sarah snapped. "She's undermining you in front of everyone, and your parents just sit there like it's normal." "It's not normal, Toby. It's toxic." Sarah was right, of course, but knowing that didn't make it any easier. Confronting Bethany felt impossible. She was so good at twisting words and making herself look like the victim. Toby had seen her do it 100 times before. Things reached a boiling point a few weeks later at another family gathering. This time, it was Toby's parents' anniversary party, a lavish affair at a fancy restaurant. Bethany, as usual, was the center of attention, holding court with Brian at her side. Sarah and Toby tried to stay in the background, but Bethany wouldn't let them. Halfway through the evening, She raised her glass and said, "Let's toast to my amazing little brother, Toby. He's always been there for me, and I know he always will be me reliable backup plan." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at Toby, waiting to see how he'd react. Sarah's hand tightened on Toby's arm, a silent plea for him to say something. Toby's heart was pounding, but he forced himself to stand up. "Bethany," Toby said, his voice shaking slightly, "I don't know what your problem is, but I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your safety net, and I'm not going to sit here and let you treat me like a joke anymore." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, Bethany looked genuinely surprised, but then her expression hardened. "Wow, Toby," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Someone's a little sensitive tonight." "I'm not sensitive," Toby shot back. "I'm tired. Tired of you belittling me every chance you get. It's not funny, and it's not okay." To Toby's surprise, a few people at the table nodded in agreement. Even Brian looked uncomfortable. But Toby's parents, predictably, tried to smooth things over. "Let's not ruin the evening," Toby's mom said, her voice tight. Bethany didn't mean anything by it. "Yes, she did," Toby replied. "And you've let her get away with it for years." That was the moment Toby realized just how deep the dysfunction ran. His parents weren't going to change. Bethany wasn't going to change. The only thing Toby could change was how he responded to it. Sarah was proud of Toby for standing up to Bethany, but the fallout wasn't pretty. Bethany stopped speaking to Toby for weeks, which honestly felt more like a blessing than a punishment. Toby's parents tried to guilt-trip him into apologizing, saying he'd overreacted and ruined the party, but Toby didn't budge. For the first time in his life, Toby put his own feelings above keeping the peace, and it felt liberating. Of course, Bethany didn't stay quiet for long. When she finally did reach out, it was under the guise of clearing the air, but it quickly became clear she had no intention of apologizing. Instead, she doubled down, claiming Toby had misinterpreted her jokes and accusing Sarah of turning him against her. That conversation ended with Toby hanging up the phone, something he'd never dared to do before. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt monumental. For the first time, Toby wasn't just Bethany's overshadowed little brother. He was his own person, and he wasn't going to let her or anyone else treat him like anything less. The family dinner started like any other, tense, formal, and pretending to be something it wasn't. Toby's parents had invited them all over for a special evening, a phrase that always made Toby suspicious. Bethany arrived late, as usual, sweeping into the room with Brian at her side and an air of self-importance that was impossible to ignore. Sarah and Toby were already seated, making polite conversation with his parents, Mark and Susan, and a few extended family members. Aunt Carol, Uncle Richard, and Toby's cousin, Lisa, who always seemed like she wanted to be anywhere but with them. Bethany barely glanced at Toby as she made her grand entrance, throwing her arms around his mother and exclaiming, "You look amazing, Mom. Did you lose weight?" Her charm was always dialed to maximum in these settings, and Toby's parents lapped it up like thirsty dogs. Brian followed behind, carrying a bottle of wine that he presented to Toby's father like it was a peace offering. "Thought this might pair well with dinner," he said, his smile as practiced as Bethany's. Sarah, seated beside Toby, squeezed his hand under the table. She hated these dinners as much as Toby did, but she came anyway, trying to be supportive. Toby appreciated her more than he could say, especially on nights like this. The meal started without much drama, the conversation staying light and focused on Bethany's latest achievements. She had recently been promoted at work and couldn't stop talking about how her boss had personally requested her for a high-profile project. Toby's parents hung on her every word, nodding and smiling like proud parents at a recital. "And what about you, Toby?" Bethany said, suddenly turning her attention to Toby with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What have you been up to?" The question was a trap. It always was. She didn't actually care about the answer. It was just a way to remind everyone that whatever Toby said would pale in comparison to her latest triumph. "Work's been good," Toby replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Busy but good." Bethany raised an eyebrow. "That's it? No big promotions? No exciting news?" "I'm happy with where I am," Toby said, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah's grip on his hand tightened. Bethany smirked and leaned back in her chair. "Well, as long as you're happy, I guess that's what matters." The comment stung, but Toby let it slide. He had learned over the years that confronting Bethany in front of his parents was a losing battle. They always took her side, no matter what. But tonight, Toby wasn't sure he could keep biting his tongue. The turning point came during dessert. Toby's mother had baked her famous apple pie, a recipe she'd passed down from her grandmother. The conversation had shifted to family traditions, and Bethany, naturally, had taken center stage. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with fake nostalgia. "It's funny how family dynamics change over time. I mean, I'll always be the overachiever, and Toby will always be." She trailed off, waving her fork in Toby's direction. "Bethany," Sarah said sharply, breaking the awkward silence that followed. "That's enough." Bethany blinked, feigning innocence. "What? I'm just saying we all have our roles. Toby's always been the quiet one, the dependable one, my backup plan, as I like to call him." She laughed, as if that made it better. Something inside Toby snapped. He pushed his chair back and stood up, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Do you have any idea how offensive that is?" Toby said, his voice louder than he intended. "You've been making these comments for years, and I've had enough. I'm not your backup plan, Bethany. I'm not your safety net, and I'm not going to let you keep treating me like this." The room went dead silent. Toby's father set down his fork, his expression darkening. Toby's mother looked as though he had just slapped her. Bethany, meanwhile, looked more amused than anything else. "Oh, come on, Toby," she said, rolling her eyes. "You're overreacting. It's a joke." "It's not a joke," Toby shot back. "It's degrading, and you know it. You use these jokes to belittle me and make yourself feel superior." Toby's father's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "That's enough, Toby. Sit down." Toby turned to him, incredulous. "Are you serious? She's been insulting me for years, and you've never said a word. But the moment I stand up for myself, I'm the problem." Bethany didn't mean anything by it, Toby's mother said, her voice tight. "You're making a scene over nothing." "Nothing," Toby said, his voice shaking. "This isn't nothing. She's been undermining me my whole life, and you've let her. You've encouraged it." Toby's father said, his tone warning, "You're out of line." Toby laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Out of line? Do you even hear yourselves? You've spent my entire life making me feel like I don't matter, like I'll never be good enough compared to her. And now, when I finally speak up, you're telling me to shut up and take it." Bethany leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine like this was some kind of soap opera she was enjoying. "Honestly, Toby," she said, "you're being so dramatic. If you can't handle a little teasing, maybe you should work on your self-esteem." Sarah stood up then, her face red with anger. "You're unbelievable," she said, glaring at Bethany. "You talk about Toby like he's some second-rate backup, but he's twice the person you'll ever be. And you," she added, turning to Toby's parents, "should be ashamed of yourselves for enabling this." Toby's mother gasped, as if Sarah had just insulted the queen. "How dare you speak to us like that? How dare you treat your son like this?" Sarah shot back. "You don't even see how toxic this family dynamic is, do you?" The argument escalated from there, voices overlapping as years of resentment and unspoken grievances spilled out into the open. Toby didn't know how long it went on, but by the time it was over, he felt drained, as if he'd run a marathon. Toby's parents didn't speak to him as he and Sarah gathered their things and left. Bethany, of course, had the last word. "Well, I guess some people just can't handle the truth," she said with a smirk as they walked out the door. In the car, Sarah reached over and took Toby's hand. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "I'm proud of you." Toby nodded, though he didn't feel proud. He felt exhausted, angry, and deeply hurt. But for the first time in his life, he had stood up for himself, and that had to count for something. The drive home from that disastrous dinner was silent for a while, the only sound coming from the hum of the engine. Sarah sat beside Toby, her arms crossed tightly, her face a storm of emotions. Toby could feel the anger radiating off her, but beneath it, there was something else, concern for him. Finally, she broke the silence. "You can't keep doing this, Toby." Toby tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I know. No," she said, her voice firmer now. "I don't think you do. Tonight wasn't just another bad dinner. It was a wake-up call. Your family doesn't respect you. They don't care about your feelings, and they never will unless you set boundaries." She was right, of course, but the thought of distancing himself from his family felt like tearing off a piece of himself. As toxic as they were still his parents, still his sister. The idea of walking away felt both terrifying and freeing. They got home, and as Toby dropped his keys on the counter, Sarah turned to him, her eyes softening. You deserve better than this, Toby. You've worked hard for everything you have, and you can't let them keep taking from you, emotionally or otherwise. That last part hit Toby like a brick. Sarah had brought up concerns about his family's financial ties to him before, especially after Toby started making a decent living. His parents had a habit of borrowing money that was never repaid, and Bethany, ever the opportunist, had hinted more than once about how Toby could help her out if she and Brian ever hit a rough patch. Toby had always brushed it off, thinking it was just family dynamics, but now it felt like another layer of manipulation. I need to think about this, Toby said finally, his voice heavy. Sarah nodded. Take your time, but don't let them guilt you into staying in this cycle. The next day, Toby called his friend and coworker, Ben. Ben was a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who had helped Toby out with a few contracts at work. If anyone could give him sound advice, it was him. They met for coffee at a quiet cafe downtown. As Toby laid out the situation, Ben listened intently, his expression unreadable. First off, he said when Toby finished, you need to protect yourself. If your family has access to any of your accounts, cut that off immediately. And if you're serious about setting boundaries, you might need to consider more than just limiting contact. You might need to get legal protection. Legal protection? Toby asked, his stomach sinking. Ben nodded. Look, I'm not saying they're going to sue you or anything, but if your parents or sister feel entitled to your money or anything else, you need to make sure they can't take advantage of you. That means reviewing your assets, setting up trusts if necessary, and maybe even writing a formal letter making your boundaries clear. The thought of it all made Toby's head spin, but he knew Ben was right. His family had shown time and time again that they didn't respect him, and if Toby didn't take action, he'd only have himself to blame when things got worse. Over the next few weeks, Toby began the process of disentangling himself from his family's financial reach. He closed joint accounts his parents had access to, updated the beneficiaries on his insurance policies, and even had Ben draft a will that explicitly stated how his assets would be handled. It felt surreal, like he was preparing for some kind of war, but it was also empowering. Sarah was Toby's rock through it all. She encouraged him every step of the way, reminding him that he wasn't doing this out of spite, but to protect himself. This isn't about hurting them, she said one night as they reviewed the documents Ben had prepared. It's about making sure they can't hurt you anymore. The real test came when Toby's parents called a week later. Toby's mother's voice was sugary sweet as she asked if he'd like to come over for dinner, to smooth things over. Toby could hear Bethany in the background, laughing about something with Brian. The image of them sitting there, planning their next subtle dig at Toby's expense, made his stomach turn. I'm sorry, Mom, Toby said, keeping his voice steady. But I think it's best if I take some time away from the family for now. There was a pause, and then her tone shifted. Toby, don't be ridiculous. We're family. We need to stick together. Family doesn't mean I have to tolerate being disrespected, Toby said, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. I need to do this for my own well-being. She sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that was meant to convey disappointment. Fine, if that's how you feel. It wasn't long before the guilt-tripping began. Over the next few days, Toby received a string of messages from both his parents and Bethany. His dad kept it short and gruff, accusing Toby of overreacting and telling him to man up. Bethany, predictably, made it all about herself, sending texts like, I can't believe you'd cut us off like this, after everything I've done for you. But the one that hit the hardest was from his mother. I just want you to know how much this is hurting us. We've always loved you, Toby, even if you can't see it. Toby almost caved after that one, almost. But Sarah was there, reminding him of why he had made this decision in the first place. Love doesn't look like manipulation, she said gently. And if they really love you, they'll respect your need for space. As time went on, the messages tapered off. Toby's parents stopped calling, and Bethany moved on to other targets for her attention. It was a strange feeling, being free from their constant judgment and demands. Lonely at times, yes, but also liberating. Toby focused on his work, his relationship with Sarah, and rebuilding his sense of self-worth. For the first time in his life, he wasn't living in Bethany's shadow or bending over backward to please his parents. He was just Toby, and it felt good. But even as Toby started to heal, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. His family wasn't the type to let things go quietly, and he had a sinking suspicion that his decision to set boundaries would come with consequences he hadn't yet anticipated. The first sign that things were escalating came in the form of a voicemail from Toby's mother. It was late on a Tuesday night when Toby saw her name flash on his phone screen. He let it go to voicemail, not ready to dive back into the family drama just yet. But the message she left was hard to ignore. "Toby," she began, her tone clipped and formal, the kind she used when she was holding back anger. "Your father and I have been talking, and we feel it's time to discuss the family inheritance. There are some things you need to understand about how we've planned for the future. Call me back as soon as you can." Inheritance. The word sent a chill down Toby's spine. He'd always suspected his parents would use it as a tool to manipulate him, and now it seemed that suspicion was coming true. Toby replayed the voicemail for Sarah later that evening, pacing the living room as he spoke. "This is them trying to reel me back in," he said, frustration bubbling under the surface. "They can't stand that I've set boundaries, so now they're dangling the inheritance in front of me like a carrot on a stick." Sarah frowned, her arms crossed as she leaned against the kitchen counter. "You don't even care about the inheritance, do you?" "Not really," Toby admitted, "but it's the principle of it. They're trying to control me again, and I'm not sure how to handle it." "Don't play their game," she said firmly. "If you call her back, they'll just use it as an opportunity to guilt-trip you. Stick to your boundaries." Toby knew she was right, but the thought of ignoring the call entirely felt wrong. So the next morning, Toby texted his mother instead. "I got your message. I'm not interested in discussing inheritance right now. I'll reach out when I'm ready." Her response came almost immediately. "That's not how this works, Toby. This is a family matter, and you need to be part of the conversation." Toby didn't reply. Over the next few days, the messages continued. Toby's father chimed in as well, sending curt texts about responsibility and respect for the family legacy. Toby tried to ignore them, but it was exhausting, like fighting a battle he hadn't signed up for. Then, out of nowhere, Bethany entered the fray. She showed up at Toby's office, unannounced, striding in like she owned the place. Toby's coworkers exchanged awkward glances as she swept past them to his desk. "Toby," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "we need to talk." Toby gestured for her to follow him into the conference room, not wanting to make a scene. Once the door was closed, he turned to her, arms crossed. "What are you doing here, Bethany?" She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made Toby's stomach churn. "I'm here because Mom and Dad are worried about you. They say you're refusing to discuss the inheritance." "I'm not refusing," Toby said evenly. "I'm just not interested right now." "Well, you should be," she said, her tone sharpening. "This isn't just about you, Toby. It's about the entire family. Mom and Dad have worked hard to build this, and you're acting like a spoiled child by ignoring them." Toby clenched his jaw, trying to keep his composure. "Bethany, if you came here to lecture me, you can leave. I've made my decision." Her smile faltered, and for a moment, Toby saw a flash of something behind her eyes, anger, maybe, or frustration, but she recovered quickly. "Fine," she said, turning to leave. "But don't say I didn't warn you when this all blows up in your face." The encounter left Toby shaken. Bethany's sudden involvement felt calculated, like she was trying to position herself as the savior of the family while painting Toby as the black sheep. And it wasn't long before Toby found out just how far she was willing to go. A few weeks later, Toby got a call from Ben, his lawyer friend. "Toby," he said, his voice urgent, "I found something you need to see." He sent Toby an email with an attachment, a financial statement linked to a bank account in Bethany's name. The balance was staggering over $600,000, but what caught Toby's attention was the list of deposits, all marked as transfers from his parents. Toby stared at the screen, his heart pounding. "This can't be real," he muttered. "It's real," Ben said. "I double-checked. Your parents have been funneling money into this account for years, probably under the guise of helping her with expenses." "Why would they do this?" Toby asked, though the answer was already forming in his mind. Bethany was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Of course, they'd bankroll her life, while leaving Toby to fend for himself. "You need to confront them about this," Ben said, "and you might want to consider taking legal action to protect yourself. This kind of favoritism could have serious implications for the inheritance or anything else they might try to manipulate you with." The thought of confronting his parents or Bethany about this made Toby's stomach turn, but he knew Ben was right. He couldn't let this go unchecked. That weekend, Toby invited his parents over to his apartment. Sarah was there for support, her presence a steadying force as Toby prepared for what he knew would be an explosive conversation. When his parents arrived, they were all smiles, as if nothing was wrong. But their expressions changed the moment Toby brought up the bank account. "I know about the money you've been giving Bethany," Toby said, his voice calm but firm. "Over $600,000. Care to explain?" Toby's mother's face turned pale, while his father's jaw tightened. "That's none of your business," he said gruffly. "It is my business," Toby shot back, "because it's a blatant example of how you've always favored her over me. And now you're trying to use the inheritance to manipulate me. I'm done with it." Toby's mother tried to placate him, her voice trembling. "Toby, we did what we thought was best. Bethany needed help." "She needed help?" Toby interrupted, his anger boiling over. "While I've been working my ass off to make ends meet, you've been handing her hundreds of thousands of dollars. Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds?" The argument escalated from there, voices rising as years of resentment came to the surface. Toby's father accused him of being ungrateful, while his mother pleaded for him to see reason, but Toby wasn't backing down. "You've always put Bethany first," Toby said, his voice shaking, "and I'm done pretending that's okay. If you want to continue this dynamic, fine, but I won't be part of it anymore." The conversation ended with Toby's parents storming out, his mother in tears, and his father muttering something about family loyalty. Sarah hugged Toby tightly as the door closed behind them, her support the only thing keeping him grounded. For the first time, Toby felt like he had truly taken a stand. It wasn't easy, and he knew there would be fallout, but he also knew it was the only way to reclaim his life. The decision to take legal action against his parents wasn't one Toby made lightly. For weeks after discovering Bethany's secret bank account, he wrestled with the implications of what it meant to sue his own family. But the more Toby thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about the money. It was about standing up for himself and finally breaking free from the toxic grip his family had on him. Sarah supported Toby from the beginning, though she made it clear it was his decision to make. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you," she said one night as they sat on the couch, the glow of the TV illuminating her determined expression. "But if you go through with this, you need to be prepared for how ugly it might get." She wasn't wrong. Toby knew his parents wouldn't take this lying down, and Bethany would undoubtedly make it her mission to turn the situation to her advantage. But Toby also knew he couldn't let fear hold him back any longer. The first step was consulting with Ben, his lawyer friend. He recommended bringing in a specialist, someone with experience in family financial disputes. That's how Toby met Laura Green, a sharp and no-nonsense attorney who had a reputation for handling complex cases with precision. Laura didn't sugarcoat anything during their first meeting. "This is going to be messy," she said, her piercing blue eyes locked on Toby's. "But based on what you've told me and the evidence you've provided, you have a solid case. If we can prove financial manipulation and favoritism that's impacted your inheritance or financial stability, we can argue for compensation." They began building the case, combing through years of financial records, emails, and text messages. Ben helped Toby track down additional documentation, including statements from family members who had witnessed the blatant favoritism over the years. His cousin Lisa, who had always been quietly supportive, agreed to testify. "I've seen how they treat you, Toby," she said over the phone. "It's not right, and it's about time someone called them out on it." The hardest part was revisiting all the moments that had led to this point. Every slight, every insult, every time Toby was made to feel like he wasn't enough at all came rushing back as he pieced together the timeline of his family's dysfunction. But with each new piece of evidence, Toby felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about setting a precedent, about showing that people couldn't get away with treating others like this, even if they were family. When the lawsuit was officially filed, the fallout was immediate. Toby's parents were furious, of course, but their anger was eclipsed by their disbelief. They genuinely seemed to think Toby wouldn't have the nerve to go through with it. Toby's father called him the day after the filing, his voice cold and clipped. "You're making a mistake, Toby," he said. "You're going to regret this." "I think the only mistake I've made is letting this go on for as long as it has," Toby replied, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "This isn't about revenge, Dad. It's about justice." Bethany, predictably, was livid. She sent Toby a series of scathing text messages, accusing him of tearing the family apart and betraying her. "You're nothing but a selfish, ungrateful brat," one message read. "Mom and Dad gave you everything, and this is how you repay them? Toby didn't bother responding. He knew anything he said would only fuel her rage. The court proceedings began a few months later, and, true to Laura's prediction, it was messy. Toby's parents' lawyer, a smarmy man named Victor Crane, tried to paint Toby as a greedy, ungrateful son who was lashing out because of jealousy. He brought up every instance where Toby's parents had helped him financially, twisting the narrative to make it seem like Toby was the one taking advantage of them. But Laura was ready for him. She methodically dismantled his arguments, presenting evidence of the blatant favoritism and manipulation that had defined Toby's upbringing. She called witnesses who testified about the disparity in how Toby's parents treated him versus Bethany, and she presented the damning financial records that showed the hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into Bethany's secret account. The most shocking moment came when Laura called Bethany to the stand. She was visibly annoyed, her usual confidence faltering under the weight of the cross-examination. Laura didn't hold back, pressing her on the specifics of the bank account and the reasons behind the massive transfers from Toby's parents. At first, Bethany tried to deflect, claiming the money was for necessary expenses and that his parents had offered it willingly. But when Laura presented an email exchange between Bethany and Toby's mother, in which Bethany explicitly demanded more money to cover her lifestyle, her facade cracked. "This is ridiculous," Bethany snapped, her voice rising. "I don't see why this is even relevant. Toby is just jealous because he's always been second best." The courtroom fell silent, her words hanging in the air like a confession. Laura let the moment linger before calmly turning to the judge. "I think that speaks for itself, Your Honor." The trial lasted several weeks, each day more exhausting than the last, but when the verdict finally came, it was worth every moment of stress and heartache. The judge ruled in Toby's favor, citing clear evidence of financial manipulation and emotional harm. Toby's parents were ordered to pay $1.2 million in compensation, a sum that felt less like a windfall and more like a validation of everything he had endured. The victory was bittersweet. Toby knew the money wouldn't fix the damage his family had done, and it certainly wouldn't repair their broken relationships. But it was a start, a way to reclaim his life and move forward without the weight of their manipulation holding him back. As Sarah and Toby left the courthouse that day, hand in hand, Toby felt a sense of relief he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he was free to live his life on his own terms, free to build a future that wasn't defined by the shadows of his past. And for the first time, Toby truly believed he deserved it. Moving to a new city was Sarah's idea, but as soon as she suggested it, Toby knew it was exactly what they needed. The court case had drained him emotionally and mentally, and staying in the same city felt like staying in the shadow of everything that had happened. The whispers, the sideways glances from people who knew his family life was suffocating. Sarah found a place 400 kilometers away, a modest but charming apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't flashy, but it had everything they needed: space to start fresh, and enough distance from his family to feel like a new chapter. Packing up their lives and saying goodbye to the city Toby had lived in for so long was bittersweet. But as they drove out of town that morning, Toby felt an unfamiliar sense of hope stirring in his chest. The new city was different, quieter, friendlier. Their neighbors introduced themselves on the first day, a retired couple named Frank and Mary who lived across the hall. Frank was a handyman with a knack for fixing anything, and Mary baked enough cookies to feed an army. "If you ever need anything, just knock," she said with a warm smile, handing them a plate of still warm chocolate chip cookies. Toby wasn't used to this kind of welcome. It felt foreign but comforting. Sarah and Toby threw themselves into settling in. She started working remotely for her marketing firm, and Toby found a job managing operations for a local tech startup. It was smaller than what he was used to, but the environment was welcoming, and the lack of corporate drama was a relief. For the first time in years, Toby felt like he could breathe. The real work, though, began when Sarah suggested they try therapy. "We've been through so much, Toby," she said one evening as they unpacked boxes in the living room. "I think it could help both of us process everything, and maybe help us figure out how to move forward." Toby hesitated at first. Therapy wasn't something he'd ever considered. It felt too vulnerable, too exposing. But Sarah was patient, and eventually, Toby agreed to give it a try. That's how they met Dr. Carol Miller, a calm and empathetic therapist who had a way of making you feel safe, even when you were baring your soul. Their first few sessions were rough. Talking about his family dredged up memories Toby had buried for years. The favoritism, the manipulation, the constant feeling of being less than, it all came flooding back. And there were moments when Toby wanted to walk out of her office and never look back. But Sarah was there, her presence steady and unwavering. And with time, Toby started to open up. Dr. Miller helped Toby see patterns he hadn't fully understood before. She showed him how his parents' behavior had shaped not only his self-esteem, but also his relationships and decision-making. You've spent so much of your life trying to prove your worth to people who were never going to see it, she said during one session. It's time to focus on what you want and what makes you happy. Sarah and Toby also worked on their relationship in therapy. The lawsuit, the family drama, the stress it had taken a toll on both of them. And Toby hadn't realized how much until they started unpacking it. But the process brought them closer. For the first time, they weren't just surviving. They were building something real, something strong. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.